And a very good morning to you. You're welcome along to Wednesdays Off the Ball AM. As ever, if you want to get in touch with us, you can get us on Twitter, Facebook or YouTube. Owen is here. How are you doing?
Morning, Ger. How are things?
Owen's been exercising his brain all morning. Obviously, it's that muscle that he flexes whenever he explains how the Kerry Club Championship works.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same muscle that you've been doing backflips around the office going, the League of Nations has finally lived up to... It's a worthy adversary for my brain. Yeah,
come Christmas this time and all the family are gathered around, my party piece will be to explain the UEFA League of Nations, because I think I've actually got this thing figured out.
Yeah, okay.
It only took me about, 5 months or however long this thing's been in the pipeline for.
And it's relatively straightforward once you crack the code.
Yeah.
You know what you're looking for here and it's like, okay, I get this now.
Yeah, I think it is relatively straightforward. I think it can be helped certainly with very simple images. It's like teaching a play school class. If you use little triangles like UEFA have done for us, then it's actually very straightforward, kind of. Chances are we're going to qualify for the Euros, right? Yes, you would need to be the victim of a very, very awful run of results, a lot of bad luck, and some just really dire performances for Ireland not to even be part of the playoff shake-up. The one caveat to all this is that because there are so many really good teams who will probably qualify from the normal run-of-the-mill qualifying, some of the crappy teams in the League of Nations might actually end up automatically qualifying through the playoffs. That's the thing. I think we can actually bring up an image here of the entire outlook, the 4 tiers of the League of Nations. So we can see here this one exactly, A, B, C and D. As you can tell, even if you don't know, if you're not too well up on your flags, the ones in A are good and the ones in D are absolutely terrible. So you can make out Gibraltar, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Macedonia,
I can.
Kosovo.
Is that the red, white and blue?
Third from the right there, which is probably the worst team there in D.
Which one's Kosovo?
Kosovo, you see the one with the 6
like
stars?
Australia?
Not really, a little kind of leaf underneath those stars.
I feel like Australia. Well, sorry, what's that red, white and blue? Is that Luxembourg?
Red, white and blue.
The one that looks
Luxembourg,
like the Dutch flag. Is it exactly the same as the Dutch flag?
I think so, yeah. And then you've got Finland to the left of that. But anyway, I'm just showing off now with my amazing knowledge of flags.
I mean, Finland looks a bit like the St. George's Cross, so that's not too hard.
Yeah, small bit. So anyway, I think, as you mentioned there, D is a very, very good way of explaining how these things will actually work.
Did you just put that graphic up so that you could show off your knowledge of flags?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
What a nerd.
I know, well, you got to show off certain things. When a party piece hits the bullseye for you, you got to show off. But yeah, basically, one person from each of those leagues is guaranteed. It's going to the Euros.
Right, yeah.
So there is one person from that pot of D going through. So Latvia might qualify and we might fail to qualify. Kosovo might qualify and we might fail to qualify. Is that interesting. The big flaw in this plan, or is this UEFA trying to throw those crappy nations a bone? It's a flaw for sure. I mean, otherwise, like if it's not a flaw, then teams will be devastated with relegation, that their coefficient will be affected, that they don't want to be moving down the tiers, whereas if Ireland were in D, they're going to the Euros. Like, guaranteed. So it's not a flaw then. We as one of those crappy nations actually will benefit from this at some point. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I suppose there's a carrot. We're all in favour of it. There is a carrot for being a crap team for sure, but that's a problem. If there's an incentive for being crap, then that's not a good thing. This is how you get elected, though. You give the crappy nations something to hope for. And yeah, we're including ourselves in those crappy nations at the moment. Dan McDonnell is in Lausanne. We're going to talk to him a little bit later on the show. Obviously, the Martin O'Neill contract was signed finally after, a minor story over the last while, but the big news from an Ireland perspective is that Sheamus Coleman is back playing football. He played for the Everton under-23s last night, and there were loads of people at it, obviously, because Sheamus Coleman was playing, and that made it a big news story. But he himself actually ended up speaking to Everton TV afterwards, and we can have a look at that now.
You look like you enjoyed that.
Yeah, very much so. Great for the game to be here as well at Goodison makes it that bit more special. Walking out there, walking out the tunnel, seeing the stadium, it was great, and really enjoyed the game. Got some minutes under my belt and felt great. Just getting out there, getting the kit on again, rolling the socks up, getting the shin pads on, getting my boots on again. Just feeling like a footballer and just walking out there was a great feeling. Obviously, they tried to change the game when I was supposed to be involved, and thankfully, it got changed, and as I said, I really enjoyed it, and I treated it like a first team game and gave it my everything.
Nice of Everton to subtitle it there for anybody who doesn't understand Donegal. Like, what? Well, it's for people, but yeah, okay, it is for subtitles for people who don't understand Donegal. Let's go along with that line.
Yeah, it's good to see Seamus Coleman back. It's good to see him speaking to the media again.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
In his clear tones.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a little bit later with Dan as well, and we have the O'Neill thing. But there's another video I want to bring the world. That if anybody's missed this, then you've really missed an absolutely cracking video. At this point, everybody knows the Alexis Sanchez video with him and his piano and his hands to the sky and walking out into the Old Trafford turf. Well, Motherwell made a big signing yesterday, and here's the video they made.
Who is he?
I don't know. He's clearly the star of some postmodern, artistic, chic house sort of production right there. So well done to Motherwell on that. And Manchester United actually responded to them with a gif of Alexis Sanchez winking.
All right.
Yeah, the modern form of diplomatic resolution, I guess.
Peter Hartley, 29-year-old centre-back.
Right, okay. Well, Pete obviously is a play on Alexis, which is one thing that really annoys me, actually, about this whole thing.
Not Sanchez anymore.
It's not Sanchez anymore. It used to be a thing that it was just the American commentators who called him Alexis.
Because they knew what they were doing.
I don't know about that. It just feels like a very American thing to say, like call him Alexis rather than Sanchez, you know, and I think he's now going to be christened Alexis in English football from now on. But anyway, let's focus on the positives here, which is that Motherwell video, which is an outstanding piece of work, and any more trolling of Manchester United is fully welcomed from our perspective.
Here's what's coming up on today's show. Seamus Coleman returns, obviously talk a bit more about that in the details in the newspaper. The start of the Paddy Jackson Stuart Olding trial in Belfast. Frank Greaney, our courts correspondent, will be covering that for us. We're going to be talking to him in just a little while to get an update on what people can expect from that today. The Nations League Explainer, we'll get into more details with that and go to Dan McDonnell and get a notion of what the groups are going to look like. There's only two teams who are going to be in Ireland's group alongside us. We'll play them home and away, and if we finish top of that group, then we're guaranteed at least a playoff for the Euros. Those playoffs are going to be single matches and knockout, and there'll be a semi-final and a final, so pretty dramatic way to qualify, I guess, if you do need it to get there. And a little bit later on, we're going to speak with Gary O'Toole about the George Gibney case. Before Christmas, Irvin Muchnick, the US journalist who's been digging deep into the George Gibney story, won a partial victory in court in San Francisco against the US State Department. He's got a freedom of information case that is long running now over a number of years about how it was that Gibney came to be allowed to enter the US. And there's a bunch of documents that the Department of Homeland Security didn't want to release to Muchnick. He won the partial release of those documents. Many of the details of them were actually redacted. He feels like there's a case that Gibney has to answer, not just for an alleged rape in Florida on American soil, but also for the possibility that he perhaps lied on his application for citizenship, which may well be reason for him to be extradited. And if he was to be extradited, perhaps there is some way for charges to be brought against him for the cases that he was involved in here in Ireland. To get the full details on that, we'll speak with Muchnick on tomorrow's show. But just to give everybody a reminder of the George Gibney case and the absolute horror of it, we spoke with Gary O'Toole, and we'll bring you that interview just around about 8:30 this morning.
We will indeed. We'll have a look at some of the back pages as well this morning. You mentioned Seamus Coleman, you mentioned Martin O'Neill. They are dominating the back page discussion this morning. On the Irish Independent, they're going with the double-hander here. Coleman returns as O'Neill signs deal. Ireland skipper plays an hour for Everton under-23s to boost manager after contract agreement. We've also got Ferris saying Schmidt should pick Zebo, and we've got an interesting one there which we'll go into a little bit more detail in just a moment. Cody wheels axe on Walsh and Farrell with Aylward's future in doubt. It's a bit of an overhaul for Kilkenny hurling at the moment, it seems. On the back of the Irish Daily Star, it says signed and healed. Double boost as O'Neill pens contract and Coleman returns. You've also got Pep is heading up Wembley way. That's Manchester City's win over Bristol City last night. 5-3 in aggregate, the final score, and they'll play either Arsenal or Chelsea in the Carabao Cup final. On the back page of the Sun, good sign 1 and good sign 2. It reads the headline, Coleman and O'Neill there, of course. O'Neill keen, ink new deal. Seamus Coleman made his long-awaited return to action last night, and Martin O'Neill, of course, rolling into the next 2 years of his contract after finally putting pen to paper on that contract. And then finally for me for now, the final say reads the back of the Irish Daily Mail. O'Neill puts pen to paper on 2-year deal, and Coleman's comeback. The other one as well is dividing Dublin in half doesn't add up for Duffy, and there's a lot of Pádraig Duffy commentary in the papers this morning. Again, another thing we'll mention in just a few moments.
Yeah, we played some clips from Pádraig Duffy stuff with Joe in studio last night. If you missed that, you can get it on the podcast, the Off the Ball Podcast Network. Now, deal done, good day as Boss O'Neill signs new contract and Coleman returns from horror break. So that's the general theme of that. City go stir crazy. Also contract details. Blues celebrate a Wembley final as Sterling prepares to sign huge new long-term deal. Raheem Sterling not paying any attention to what's going on with Alexis Sanchez and deciding that he's going to tie himself down to a massive long-term contract again just before the TV rights deal is done and just before he learns exactly how much money Manchester City are going to have extra on top of the billions that they have. So I'm just saying, if I was your agent, I'd be saying, sit it out. You're in the form of your life. You're going to get better and better. A lot of teams want to play with Raheem Sterling in the lineup. If BBC is getting rid of being jettisoned at Real Madrid, who knows, Raheem? Who knows? Could be $1 million a week, Raheem.
Maybe.
$1 million a week.
Or maybe he's saying to him, hey Raheem, you're a footballer, who cares about money when you've got this amount of money already in your pocket? Care about your legacy, care about playing under Pep Guardiola, who has made you the best you've ever been.
Have you ever watched any football?
Yes.
What?
Oh, you sound like one of those Twitter trolls. Does Lionel Messi Twitter trolls?
He didn't pick Leo Messi when he had the chance. Owen didn't pick Leo Messi. This is his team. Cristiano Ronaldo, Harry Kane and Neymar are his front three. Not Leo Messi, the greatest footballer of all time.
Not Raheem Sterling, who's apparently worth $1 million a week.
2020 vision for O'Neill. Irish boss finally puts pen to paper in another 2-year deal. More contract details. This one, though, you definitely would recommend signing. Jordan Larmour has signed his contract with Leinster. It's a full-time senior contract for him, and that makes a lot of sense.
Should have held out.
From him, in his perspective, at 20. Great deal from Leinster's perspective, too. FA failing to enforce rules on gambling. Loophole lets some owners bet on their own team. At least 1/4 of players are violating ban. They quote Andy Reid, and they also quote Joey Barton. Yeah, of course. He reckons Joey Barton obviously banned from the game for betting at the moment. He reckons loads of footballers are betting on themselves. They use their dad's name or their partner's name to bet. And you're not supposed to bet on your own team if you're an owner, but a couple of the owners of Premier League teams also happen to be bookmakers, so there's kind of a special rule for them, which seems fair enough in some ways. And Brian Cody is going to be free to oversee the start of Kilkenny's National League campaign after it was confirmed that he won't face any further sanction for being sent off in the Walsh Cup, so he's not getting banned for 4 weeks.
On the front page of the Irish Examiner sports section, it's an impactful enough picture of Pádraig Duffy there. Black or white reads the headline. Pádraig Duffy on the GAA's battle to remain amateur. And then in the Irish Times, clearing April for clubs, a realistic and necessary rebalancing, says Sean Moran. In his final annual report, Pádraig Duffy says counties unable to provide decent club schedules this year will have only themselves to blame. Also his own column Moran there saying continued blind eye to payment of managers frustrates Duffy. That's the front page of Sports Wednesday there on the Irish Times.
And the English newspapers all leading with their tennis player. Edmund's stunning victory over Dimitrov sets up historic semi-final clash with Cilic. And All Face Cancer head on London Irish hookers inspiring story. That's the back page of The Guardian as well. Wizard in Oz, brilliant Edmund slays world number 3 Dimitrov to set up semi-final showdown with Cilic. Andy Murray's verdict, wow. It's handy we can just get a comment from people when they tweet stuff and go, that's his verdict, and we spoke to him because we read his thing on Twitter. The other news from last night, obviously Manchester City through to the final of the Carabao Cup. They won 3-2 at Ashton Gate last night against Bristol City. Richard Hemming says, I can't hear the show, I'm just about to board a plane back from Bristol to Dublin, but Bristol were magnificent last night. Man City are a class team. Seeing De Bruyne et al. Up close is something else. Here's hoping we make it to the Premier League. Things are looking good for Bristol at the moment. Bit of drama. It's good that Man City don't just go and whack that team, actually concede some goals.
Yeah.
Give the minnows a bit of a chance.
Because I was thinking that Carabao Cup and FA Cup, the prestige of those competitions has suddenly been increased because of Manchester City running away with the Premier League. Little did I expect that Manchester City would actually just take those two competitions really seriously as well, and are now on for a quadruple.
Yeah, so we'll know tonight who Man City are facing in the final of the Carabao Cup. Scoreless in the first leg at Stamford Bridge. So tonight at the Emirates, Arsenal and Chelsea go at it. I think it's a 7:45 kickoff. Roger Federer is up against Thomas Burdick in his quarterfinal in the Australian Open. That one starts at 8:30. So if you're watching this a little bit later, it's half an hour time from now. You probably know the result.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be Federer who wins that, after my amazing prediction that Djokovic would coast through the other day, which completely backfired in my face.
Okay, to Belfast now, and to Frank Greaney, our Communicore Courts correspondent, who's on the line to talk to us about the trial, which will finally open today, the trial involving Paddy Jackson and Stuart Olding. Frank, good morning to you. What can people expect from today?
Good morning, Ger. Well, today is the first day of the trial, so I expect a jury will be sworn in at about 10:30 this morning, and then we'll have the opening address from the prosecuting barrister, and then the first witness, who's likely to be the complainant in this case, will give evidence. The media have been instructed to be there early. There's obviously going to be a lot of attention because of the high profiles of Paddy Jackson in particular, but also, of course, his Ulster and Ireland teammate, Stuart Olding, who was also facing a rape charge in relation to the same woman. It's an allegation that arises from an alleged incident in a house in South Belfast in June of 2016. There are two other co-accused. Jury likely to be sworn in at about 10:30 this morning, and proceedings should get underway then shortly afterwards.
Frank, how long do trials like this normally take?
Rape trials, the rape trials that I would cover down in the Criminal Courts of Justice in Dublin are usually quite short in comparison to, say, a murder trial. Usually it's just a complainant's evidence against the accused, and obviously there may be forensic evidence and things like that called. In this instance, because there are four defendants, and obviously then four legal teams, it will probably take a little bit longer than your average rape trial, because of the fact that each prosecution witness may be cross-examined by four different legal teams. So we haven't been given any indication as to duration. I imagine we will do before the jury is sworn in today. The judge is likely to tell the potential jurors how long they'll have to give to this particular case.
Okay, and you said there's four defendants. That's four separate charges, and the charges range from rape to perverting the course of justice. Is that one of the charges?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So Paddy Jackson and Stuart Olding, like I've mentioned, they're each facing a rape charge in relation to that alleged incident in June of 2016. And then arising from the same incident, there are separate charges in relation to a man called Blaine McElroy. He's 26 years of age. He's from Royal Lodge Road in Belfast, and he's accused, he's facing one count of exposure. And then there's another man, a man called Rory Harrison. He's 25 years of age, and he's from Mance Road, also in Belfast City, and he's facing two charges, one of perverting the course of justice, and the other is of withholding information. Now, it should be noted that Paddy Jackson is also facing another very serious charge, a charge of sexual assault that he also denies. That's a charge that carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison if he is convicted. The rape charge, like down south, carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. The exposure charge that Mr. McElroy is facing, there's a maximum penalty there of two years in prison, and the perverting the course of justice and withholding information offence that Mr. Harrison is facing, well, that's a very serious offence, and that carries a potential sentence of a lifetime in prison.
Frank, great stuff. Thanks very much for giving us all that detail, and we'll obviously stay in touch with you over the course of this case. That's Frank Greaney, our courts correspondent in Belfast, for that trial.
Indeed. Yeah, I think we're going to get into some more of the paper stories. We're going to actually get through these pretty quickly because we've got Dan McDonnell on the line very shortly from Switzerland in Lausanne, where this draw is today. In terms of the Nations League, we might actually bring up on the screen the potential people that Ireland could actually draw in the UEFA Nations League. We'll get that graphic up in a moment, but it's actually set out in terms of seeding. There's three little pods, as you can see here, pots even. So Austria, Wales, Russia, Slovakia, one from those is who we're going to draw, and then the other team will be either Northern Ireland, Denmark, Czech Republic and Turkey. We can't play Sweden, which when you look at those teams there, is one of the strongest ones that we probably could have faced outside of Russia, who were the host country there. And
well, Denmark, Russia and Denmark is the grimmest of grim, right?
Yeah, it is. They're the only two people in the World Cup this summer, aren't they? So outside of Sweden in our own pot. So that would be the grimmest of the grim, as you say. Who knows what sort of kick Ryan Giggs will give Wales, but essentially this bit is very simple. You get one from pot 1, one from pot 3, and it's a 3-team group, and you play them each home and away, and you got 4 games, and then if we win our league, we get promoted to League A, which includes all the usual suspects that I don't need to list off for you. That would be great, though. Promotion would be great. It would be. Completely would be. I would be very excited about this, even though we wouldn't have a prayer of getting a playoff spot as a result of League A. Well, I say that, but that's not actually the case. So League A, we get hammered in every single game and say we're the worst team in League A. But we don't. We get 4 draws, because that's what we get. We draw with teams in international football. Okay, my point isn't about performance here. My point is that if Ireland were in League A and happened to finish way down the pecking order, all the League A teams are going to qualify for the Euros automatically via their own group. And we will be the default team left in League A to actually be involved in the playoff shake-up in League A. So, and you'd be guaranteed a playoff against a team who's probably pretty crappy from the second tier, who wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. Exactly. So I might just explain this, and Dan can go into this a little bit in more detail as well. And I'll only explain the playoff situation here because there's a lot more to it. So basically the top 4 teams in each league, so the one from each group, will go forward to the playoffs, assuming they haven't qualified for Euro 2020 via their actual qualifying group. If all the 4 teams, which will happen in League A, have already qualified via their traditional qualifying group, then the second team will take their place. And between those 4s, as you mentioned earlier on, there will be a semi-final and a final, and one team will qualify for the Euros via that playoff. In League D, that's a huge thing, because all those 4 teams, none of them probably will have qualified via the traditional means. For us, it'll probably be a big thing as well, because even if we don't top our little pool of 3, chances are whoever finishes top of that, which could be a Russia or something, will have qualified anyway. So we're in the shake-up for the playoffs that way. Then what I suspect will happen here is that everybody in League A is going to qualify for the Euros via traditional means. What happens then? Like, where is that playoff spot going for League A? Well, it'll be solely made up of players, or of teams rather, from League B, or maybe even League C, who haven't been good enough to finish top of their pool for the League B playoff route. Yeah. It's all very complicated, and it seems very complicated, but it's quite simple when it's down on paper and you're actually staring at this thing. Do we have any sense yet of how those one-off matches, so the semi-finals and finals of the playoffs, would be decided? Because normally it would be home and away. That format has been abandoned, and all of a sudden we have the situation where we get drawn in a playoff against a playoff semi-final against, say, a Russia. Where's that game? Do we know? The top seed, I would suspect. Yeah, there is a seeding process when it comes to the 4 teams, but of course, only 4 games. There's a chance there could be dead heats and stuff, and that tiebreak I would assume will be the coefficient. Okay. That's a question I have for Dan. How are the tiebreaks sorted out, and where are the locations? I presume it's going to be the home team. Good to put him on the spot there. Don't warn him in advance that we're going to ask him this unbelievably tricky question. But okay, let's move on, because we will get to Dan in just a minute. But Graham Hunter was in studio last night. We've been working with Graham for a decade and a half at this point, but he was in talking with Kev last night. And speaking of Wales, here he is talking about Gareth Bale's situation at Real Madrid.
When Mbappe was the absolute priority for Real Madrid, and they didn't have a plan B. They were being told all last summer by Mbappe's people, crystal clear from the start, at least one of the BBC, Bale, Benzema and Cristiano Ronaldo must be sold, otherwise Mbappe's not coming. Florentino Perez didn't really believe them, but he believed that he could shift Gareth Bale to Manchester United. Gareth didn't want to leave, legitimately wanted to say, that last season, even though I've had a few minutes in Cardiff and I've won the Champions League again back to back, that injury hit season in a club where I enjoy being, in a lifestyle I enjoy in Madrid, I don't want to go back yet. I'm not moving. And he didn't, because he's got a contract till 2021. They didn't have a second idea of what to do if Mbappe didn't sign. Mbappe fulfilled his promise to go somewhere else if they didn't clear out one of the players. And therefore, there were sections of the media who went, I know what we'll do. We'll disparage Gareth Bale. We'll rubbish him. Every time he doesn't score. Literally, every time he doesn't score. And it's not his primary purpose at Real Madrid to be a 35-goal a season. Every time he's injured, we'll lump on him in the media. Radio, television and press. Ignoring what he's good at, Kevin, and therefore, the fact that I have this bugbear about him, that from the start of the season, whenever he's played, although he's been injured, he's been Madrid's best player. Yeah. Irrespective of away, home, which competition And what you saw at the weekend is whatever, I think he's contributed 8 or 9.
Well, there you go.
You should have opened your mouth and started lip syncing Graham Hunter. That would have been quite funny.
Imagine Gareth Bale now joins Manchester United in the summer instead of Ronaldo. That's pretty good.
Yeah, would you use that as some sort of evidence that he should never have signed a contract and that nobody should sign contracts? Because I presume Gareth Bale hasn't signed a contract in a while.
I mean, I could do, but moving on from that other conversation that we were having to a new conversation, Alexis Sanchez, Gareth Bale and whoever.
Well, let's not write Lukaku off.
Well, it's okay, so I'll stick Lukaku in there.
Yeah, I think there is Lukaku's Manchester United career as being an elite striker isn't done yet.
That would be a good league.
It would be. It absolutely would be. And I think there will be a lot of people that come the end of the season salivating over the prospect of a Manchester United, Manchester City title race next season, and maybe even Chelsea in the mix. When were we last doing this? Oh, at the end of last season, when Manchester City came very good, we were like, it's going to be very interesting next year. Chelsea will be up there, United will be up there,
well,
City will even be back.
Nathan, in fairness to him, was like in the middle of the summer, last summer, going, Man City could just kill this league very early. They're way better than everybody else. And he was right. So... but I do think that if you add in Gareth Bale from the start of the season, they will be very difficult to defend against, which haven't been the case this year, and that would change things. Let's get to Dan. We can talk about that a little bit later. Dan, good morning to you.
Morning, guys.
So, the hard work for this piece of broadcasting has been done largely by Eoin, who managed to explain how the groups are going to work. He did have one very tricky question. It was, say we're in the playoffs, the ultimate playoffs, the one-legged playoff semi-final and final. How do they decide who gets home advantage?
Yeah, you see, you're killing me here with this. Because I actually heard the tail end of your discussion and your plan to drop this on me. And I'm thinking, oh crap, this is one of the things we couldn't really hammer down yesterday. That there's definitely home advantage, you're playing for home advantage in the semi-final, but the final part needs to be established properly as far as I'm aware. That's a small bit of a grey area. We were given a media guide with various bits of detail and so on, and definitely you're playing for position in terms of home advantage in the semi, but there's a suggestion the final could be neutral venue.
Oh, yeah.
I just think fully nail that down, because it's going to be a bit of a scramble for flights and stuff, you would imagine, if you win that game on the Saturday or whatever day it might be, and then you're suddenly playing a game 4 days later. It could be a bit of a scramble, so I think they need to nail this down a small bit.
Obviously, everybody criticised the hell out of this when it was floated as an idea, unwieldy, bureaucratic, nightmare, nonsense, meaningless, friendly nonsense. But actually, all of a sudden, when you're a country like Ireland, this is going to be relatively exciting. These games are going to be meaningful, and ultimately, it's a way into the European Championships, and we need whatever help we can get there.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I think if you're one of the nations in League D, that bottom one, this is more exciting than the draw for the main tournament itself, because you've probably got no chance of getting through regular qualifying, but you've got a chance of getting through this. So it's this draw is probably as big as any. I think for a nation like Ireland, it's a bit confusing, really, still in some ways, that we're in League B, and I know Eoin would have laid it out already. It's almost very hard to imagine that between A and B, that most of the teams won't get through regular qualifying anyway. So I think our chances of getting the playoff are pretty good as a backup. And really our results will just determine, as you say, almost where we might be ranked if we end up needing that playoff. It's still a small bit difficult to sell something when you're talking about a game saying this game is sort of meaningful, but we'll tell you in a year if it really is that meaningful. And that's a slight angle. It might be hard come October, November to really push a game, but we're in a reasonably good position. The higher up you are in the league, there's a very good chance you're going to get a playoff at the end of it, unless there's a very unusual sequence of results.
I have a theory, though, that finishing top of the little group of three might not actually be the best course of action, because there is a good probability here that the entire League A is going to be wiped out in terms of playoff responsibility by the fact of the traditional qualifying, that every single one of those 12 teams are going to be out of the playoff picture because they won't need to qualify for the playoff. And in which case, then they'll start taking the second seeds from League B to make the substitute League A playoff route happen. If Ireland comes second, they could be in an exclusively second and third place playoff situation, which would be very attractive indeed. Obviously, you don't plan for that. You want to win every game. And also, if one League A team fails to make it through traditional qualifying, then you're a bit screwed.
Yeah, and that's the thing where come November, whatever about now, You're going to be looking at all these permutations, trying to figure it all out, and then into next year. The one thing about that scenario about winning your League B group is it means the next time this comes round, you're in a strong position, for the next World Cup, which they need to hammer down how it's going to work then. I still think this is hard sell for people. It's unwieldy, as you said, Ger, and I still think there's an element of that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see today even how they spin it and try and make it clear, because sometimes people just want to watch a game and know what 3 points means. They don't need all these clauses and scenarios. But maybe over time it'll develop its own personality and people will get into the groove and figure out how it works. But this first renewal, I think, is going to be a struggle for some people still.
Yeah, ultimately it's a competition, and the top 4 teams from each of those groups of 3 in Group A will go through to a semi-finals and a finals next summer, I think, which is exciting given the teams that could be involved in it. But as you mentioned there, it's hard to know if those big teams will actually have the buy-in for this.
Yeah, I think that the selling point for them, you look at England, for example, in the last even World Cup group, they strolled through it. They're going to get maybe more competitive quality games in the Nations League. I think for the teams maybe in the top league, there's going to be that element to it. They're going to get through the regular groups next year, barring a sort of a calamity. So they might get higher quality games than this. And then for the teams in the League D, the bottom one, this is amazing for like Belarus and Georgia and these nations who this is their way in. I think it's in B and C, the sort of middle rump that Ireland are in. It's just hard to figure out at this point what the value of it is, and we'll see how seriously it's taken. I think each nation might have a different approach to it. I think Ireland probably need that safety net. We generally end up in the playoff anyway. So, this is the playoff route now, so I don't think you can be complacent about it, certainly.
No, definitely. So we were looking at some potential draws for today. We could end up in a group with Russia and Denmark, and you have to say, if you're Martin O'Neill, that's not the worst way to blood new players. Away in Russia in a game where you can't have 10 subs at half-time, where there is something riding on the outcome. There's some meaning invested in that more than, say, I'm going to give you your debut against Saudi Arabia in London or against Oman at Fulham. It definitely seems to be a better way of giving international football some standing and credibility in between tournaments.
Yeah, I think that is the test. I guess in a year's time, if we've had a run of games with no sort of friendlies, no games with Oman, that maybe we can look at our schedule and say, well, that's been a productive year or so that we've had. And it is true, like that you would hope that for Declan Rice or whatever sort of players we're looking to blood later in the year, even guys who are slightly older, Matt Doherty and Greg Cunningham and people like this, that they're coming into games that matter. I'm not sure how Martin O'Neill would feel about playing Denmark twice again. I'd say you could probably do without the the symbolism and the stories and the angles that a Denmark game would bring up. But I take the point generally about playing even a Russia or a Czech Republic or a Slovakia or even a Wales, that there'll be games with a bit of intensity around them. But that requires a buy-in from the public too, and they need to go along to a game and from in every country and believe that this matters. And I think they need to see strong teams as well. They maybe don't want to see 7 or 8 experimental teams either, because that sort of plants the feeling that this doesn't matter that much either. And there's a balance to be found, that you want someone like Rice to come in, say, for example, to a side that the other 10 players are first choice, that these are proper games. And I think that's the balance that this competition needs to strike.
Yeah, obviously Martin O'Neill signed his new deal. That story seems to have blown over. It wasn't particularly well managed on all sides over the course of the events, but is it a case of all's well that ends well as far as everybody is concerned?
I suppose today he's going to take questions on it for the first time, and I think this is a necessary stage of the process. But I guess from their perspective, and the story hasn't necessarily been managed that well from all sides, as you mentioned, and maybe some people feel it's just been a bit of a circus, and they think that maybe even media-wise we've gone on about it a bit too much. But I think the one point is that O'Neill, I guess, needs to give his take in a sort of a satisfactory way to explain what happened, to explain his commitment going forward in terms of if a club comes up, a club job comes up in the next couple of months, and how he will approach that. And I think once that is done today, we can move on. He is signed on for the next couple of years. You just need to hear his take on everything that's happened, because that's the one thing that we've missed, other than that sort of 30-second hostage negotiation FBI video, a sort of proper question and answers. And I think then we will all move on. I think there will be a natural element today of speak about that, but also speak about some of the points that you mentioned about younger players going forward. What are your plans? And I think then the show does start to move on and look ahead. And it helps when you've got proper fixtures on the list, which is the one thing that we haven't had. We have this vacuum from missing out for the World Cup that's left us with this weird year, not an exciting year, as people have said, but maybe when the fixtures are laid down on paper, there'll be a bit more clarity about what it all means.
A couple of weeks ago, when it seemed that Martin O'Neill to Stoke was a done deal and that he was definitely not going to be the manager of the Republic of Ireland before things dramatically changed, we suddenly got into this discourse about Roy Keane and whether or not he would follow him or whether or not he would step up to the mantle and become Republic of Ireland senior manager. Martin O'Neill is going to stick with the same backroom team. Is Roy Keane, is he happy to be in this role? Is he still angling towards becoming a top-level manager and just feels he needs 2 more years of experience as assistant?
Yeah, that's a point. I mean, Roy Keane is in Switzerland. He's coming today as well to the draw. I think, all the soundings were, I guess, over the last couple of weeks with everything that was going on, was that Roy Keane was very much staying with Martin O'Neill as opposed to ever, splitting away and being a contender for the job if he'd left. It does appear that at this stage of his, I don't know, is development the right word, that it still seems to work for Roy Keane to be working under Martin O'Neill. I'm not sure if the right job has necessarily come up for Keane. I don't think he's been sort of turning down all sorts of offers. There have been offers. Celtic at the very start of the 5 years, but I'm not sure if there's been a huge amount of clubs, say in England, sort of knocking on the door for him. And strangely enough, maybe going back into Stoke with O'Neill might have been his best route back in that way. And maybe in 2 years' time, we will see a succession sort of plan from an Irish context, and maybe that would be the seamless one for Keane. And it's hard to see O'Neill doing a 4th campaign. I know we're looking far ahead now, and maybe a World Cup cycle might be a time where you would take a punt on a boss who maybe has got less experience. But for now, anyway, Keane is with O'Neill, and I don't think he's angling to get away. I think he seems content enough, but we'll see. They still have to get through the next year. There's still a feeling, amongst the public, as we know, as you would get it from messages into the show and so on, that people are a bit ambivalent to them staying. And I still feel that they need to move beyond Denmark and sort of get a couple of good results the next year, because otherwise I think the mood could still be a bit, maybe toxic is strong, but there's definitely there could be a negativity around the place, and that shouldn't be forgotten. A lot of people are still sore and not convinced about this team now, and they need to get a couple of results over the next year as well and get the balance right again with experimenting and not just taking a couple of defeats either. That could make things pretty iffy.
That's why I think this draw is of relevance today, and that's why it feels like they're going to take it very seriously, because while they do definitely need new blood, they also need to make sure that the fans are still as with them as they were for most of that qualifying campaign. Certainly the 15 minutes before Denmark actually scored at Lansdowne Road was pretty amazing, and that was a clear sign that the team and the fans were unified. We shouldn't take that for granted either. But just to move on then, Seamus Coleman obviously played 50 odd minutes last night for Everton, and there is a sense, notwithstanding the James McCarthy injury, that they will have a bunch of new players to look at, while there are also players like Seamus Coleman there that will be the bedrock of this team heading into the next 4 years of wherever these campaigns take us.
Yeah, but Coleman, as you say, he is the forefront of that. He is the leader of it. He's going to be, I think, 31 when the finals come to Dublin, in 2020. This is, I suppose, the prime of his career campaign for Coleman in some ways, this sort of 2.5 year cycle. And that is the ultimate regret about missing out in the summer. It's stating the obvious how much he was missed, but I think he is someone who's very popular, well liked. He's a good leader for this dressing room. You can even see on that Everton game last night, the young lads there are sort of, they're looking up to him. He is now firmly a senior player, and as much as you mentioned, we do have some younger players emerging, but there's not a huge raft of them, and they don't have much experience, the ones we're talking about now. We need Coleman at the forefront of it. Robbie Brady is obviously on the long-term injury list at the moment. And we have those handful of players that this is their time now. They've stepped out of the shadow of the O'Shea and even the Walters, the Glenn Whelan, and that generation now are very much in limbo in terms of where they stand. And this is the time for Coleman to come forward and really be at the forefront of this group with McLean and Brady and Hendrick and whoever may emerge from the others. We do have a long time till the next really big game, as much as these games in the autumn matter to a point. But we have a window now where you have a year of transition really, but you need Coleman there. You need him to be leading it. You need him to be meeting the new players that come into the camp and being around. So it is a boost. It's not the boost that would have been if we were in a World Cup, but it's still a boost to have him back all the same and to have him setting the examples in Turkey maybe in 2 months' time in that training camp. That he is a part of that from the start, and this is a new cycle and a new team to a point.
17-year-old Michael Obafemi is the latest Irish player who has represented Ireland at underage level, who is suddenly being tapped up by other nations. We've seen this movie before. What's the likely outcome, do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to read. I mean, it's a bit of a surprise that he played the other day, and certainly from reading the reports of people who I suppose cover the underage scene very sort of on a daily basis almost, and I said John Fallon in our newspaper mentioning that it's maybe Nigeria that are the real rival in this case, maybe as opposed to the English side of things. It's a difficult one. I mean, he has been involved in the most recent international window. He was playing for Ireland. You would hope that you've done enough at that point to keep him on board. And it has been mentioned that in March we have 21s games, we have important under-19 games, you have this senior training camp, and it will be interesting to see how they play it, because we sometimes look back in history to like the Czech Republic, I think it was in '98, when Mick McCarthy played all these players at once, 5 or 6 debutants, and you wonder, I think Martin O'Neill would be probably conscious of the optics of trying to present Turkey as well as a new team and a new era, and I think he might fast track a couple. I'm not sure if Obafemi would. It could be a bit early for him, but maybe he's moved up the ladder to the sort of the 21s, and do they look at doing things that way? But I think he'll bring a couple away with him to Turkey. I'm not sure who they'll be. I mean, Rice obviously would be the obvious one, but we have seen this movie before, and sometimes we're a bit paranoid about every player that comes through, that we fear we're going to lose them. But the nature of international football now has made that possible. And to be honest, we play that game with players from Northern Ireland, so we can't get too moralistic about the sharks that circle, because in another context we are that shark.
Totally, but presumably Nations Cup games, if he gets capped in one of those, that would count as having made your decision, and that's it?
Well, there's a wonderful question as well. I think UEFA are saying that, but we need to clarify it, because in the World Cup, in the world ranking stages, it's been given the same status as a friendly. Right. But I think the associations are indicating that it should count as competitive. But again, there's so many questions to clarify. What is the standing of these games, and that's something we're looking to ascertain today as well. But if it did count, I think you might see definitely a couple of 85th minute substitutions later on in the year if that was the case.
Yeah, no harm.
Just one last point on that, Dan, in terms of what we could be missing if Obafemi doesn't choose Ireland's. Like, there's not exactly a great track record in recent history. I think you mentioned John Fallon there, and I think he was pointing out in your paper yesterday just about the last 7 or 8 underage Irish internationals who've appeared and made a debut in the Premier League, that none of them really, or maybe one of them is being capped for Ireland, that it's not to do with them being selected by other countries, it's to do with the fact that they turn out not to live up to that potential really, or maybe they just haven't reached that potential yet. So I don't think Martin O'Neill is going to be overly in a hurry to cap Michael Obafemi, because ultimately you need to be good enough to play for the Ireland senior team.
Yeah, no, I think there is a point in that. I mean, it is striking that sometimes you do get teenagers who get a game. It might suit their Premier League club at that period in time to blood a couple of players. We saw that with Kevin Toner at Aston Villa before. It was a manager on the way out, effectively, trying to give some guys a chance, as opposed to their emergence being a real sign that they're going to be there for the long haul. And I mean, if you were to go through the Irish side at the moment and ask how many of them were mapped as teenagers, I mean, you think of the likes of Seamus Coleman and sort of John Walters, even Sean Maguire, who has come through in the last year. We talk about the likes of Matt Doherty and Greg Cunningham and players, maybe Alan Brown, players who might be ready now. they actually are guys who are maturing in their early 20s and coming to the boiled then almost. And that is the profile of Irish player that history has shown, that they last the course, the slightly later bloomers. So yeah, you can't place too much stock in it. You can't necessarily rush them. I think Rice looks to be an exception to the rule. I think Rice looks to be the business, and he is the one that they'll need to be taken very seriously. But I do agree. I mean, Obafemi had a cameo on Sunday. I don't think we should be losing the plot over it completely and losing the run of ourselves and being desperate to tie them down. But I think it's maybe the later developer. You know, the young lads going to Turkey could be 24, 25, you know, and that is realistically where we're at.
One last point, Nathan has just tweeted, if Ireland win our group in the Nations League, we'll get a top 2 seeding for the Euro 2020 draw, a backup playoff for Euro 2020 if we need it, and promotion to the top division of the Nations League, which should guarantee a top 2 seeding for the 2022 World Cup draw. So there's definitely an impetus and a momentum to be gained from a good draw today and good performances over the next 12 months.
Yeah, no, the seeding aspect is one, I should have mentioned. I guess if you talk about the short-term importance, the clearest one is your seeding for the draw, the Euro 2020 draw in Dublin in December. And I mean, we've had mixed results with draws in recent years. I mean, I know we were 4th seeds last time round, but I still think the draw was pretty kind. But yeah, I think that is something that I think we'll hear Martin O'Neill make this point today. Certainly something that's very tangible is that good results and you will be seeded second come later this year, and that should make things clearer going forward, you know, in terms of our 2020 prospects. So there is something to play for, and I think from a football angle it's easy to sell. I just think for the punters going to the game, I'm not sure if that's something that really energises them, you know, cheering a great seeding, you know. So that's going to be the challenge when we get to September, October to sell these might need to win games to people.
All right, good stuff, Dan. Thanks a million. Enjoy the draw.
Cheers, guys.
That's Dan McDonnell there. Obviously the main reason that most of the football journalists are there to actually finally speak to Martin O'Neill about Stoke. It wasn't a big deal. I spoke to them, wasn't interested. I was never really going to go.
Yeah.
That's what I would say if I was him.
I knew you had a slow news cycle. I wanted to give you something. I wanted to give something back to you, beautiful journalists.
Early in the new year, lads, you've nothing better to do, right?
Yeah. On that point that Dan made, I would celebrate a seeding. I would celebrate the side of Ireland being moved from this glass bowl to that glass bowl. Like, yes. That's what I want from this. I will completely celebrate the seedings, so I am the only fan who would do that, probably.
Well, Nathan's obviously he's hot for the seedings too. It's not a bad point. Like
it's a good point.
We've been waiting for this to roll around, given that it's been in the works for 3.5, 4 years, and most of the things that UEFA do, there is a knee-jerk reaction from all of us, in fairness, about this is ridiculous. Why are they doing it? And now there's some Euro 2020 games coming to Dublin. I'm like, actually, maybe. Spreading it out all over Europe isn't the worst idea. Yeah,
the old greater good of Europe, which is such a crap line when you hear it, might actually have some truth in it.
Maybe UEFA can save the whole European project by smearing games all over and everybody going, we're all part of the same grand design European thing.
Yeah. Nigel Farage can light the torch on the opening night of this.
Screw you, Farage, I think would be what UEFA is saying.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
Right, let's move on. As ever, if you want to get in touch with us, you can get us on Twitter @OffTheBall or @OffTheBallAM is one of our other accounts. And remember, you can turn on notifications there so that anytime we go live with a broadcast, you will be informed of it, and you can just click the link and away you go. So, now, before Christmas, the American journalist Irvin Muchnick won a partial victory in his Freedom of Information case against the US State Department. Now, this is a little bit complicated, so bear with me. Muchnick has been chasing the child abuse scandal in American sport for a very long time. He got interested as he went in the case of George Gibney, the notorious former Irish Olympic swimming coach. Gibney fled to the US after he was accused of multiple counts of child rape. Although he was never convicted, his victims did swear affidavits about what had happened to them. The Sunday Tribune printed all of their testimonies in an unbelievably powerful piece of journalism, which really gave a clear indication of who George Gibney was and what he'd done. Gibney now lives in the US, and that's kind of where he ended up coming across Muchnick's radar. We're going to put Irvin Muchnick on the show tomorrow to give us the full details of the latest situation with regards to that case and where it stands now. But to put some context on why it's important that we continue to talk about the case of George Gibney and who he is, we thought it would be worth talking to Gary O'Toole, and that was a good call. Maybe we should start at the start. Do you remember the first training session that you ever had from George Gibney?
Oh, interesting question. I can remember as long back as probably the summer of 77 or summer of 78 when I used to train, and I was invited to train with the senior group, which they looked like old men at that time, but as now I understand that they were 17 and 18-year-olds swimming, and they'd swim in the central lanes and I'd swim in the side lane, and I would spend half the time down on the bottom of the pool just playing and just swimming around. But I don't remember when he ever started to, lash and lavish praise my way. It just kind of evolved and started to win competitions. And then when you start to win competitions, as someone said to me, what spurred you on? Well, no doubt I liked winning, but it was the attention, the praise, and being able to please your coach that inspired you partly at that time. When you're so young, that's what you're only looking for, to be endorsed and to be praised. I suppose that's what did it at the start.
You were obviously very good. So at what point do you start realizing that the praise is coming and it's not going to everybody else at the same levels, that actually your standard is higher than most of the people you're swimming against?
They were quick. Everyone was very, very quick to try and capitalize on talent at that time. And in 1979, I won the British Open Championships in 4 different categories. And that was the first time that had been done by anyone, British or Irish. So that's when it started to come thick and fast after that. People started to pay attention. George Gibney, who was the coach at the time, he started to use that to make connections all around. When I was 10, I flew on a Fitzwilton Group scholarship to go to California to train in California. Things that, as a father of 2 11-year-old girls, you would shake your head and say, that's absolutely nuts, that's absolutely crazy. But at that time, the opportunity and the lifestyle that it potentially sold for me was really important. And you just felt that nothing could go wrong, that all you were doing was going to California in the sun. You're going to swim in the best swimming club in the world in Mission Viejo with the best coaches. You're going to see what was going on. And it was amazing for a 10-year-old.
Who went with you on that trip?
On that trip, I went with Caroline Heavey, who was a 1984 Olympian that George Gibney coached, myself and George Gibney. So there was just the 3 of us that went. I was so naive, Jaron. I tell my girls this story. I was flying out, and Aer Lingus flew direct to LA in those days. The cost of the ticket was £1,200, and that was not business class. And I was sitting beside this woman on the flight, who was a lovely woman, and a relative, turns out a relative of a swimmer in the swimming club at the time. And as she was getting off the plane, she said, well, you might look me up in LA, here's my number. And as I was walking through, I remember turning to Caroline Heavey and saying, what are you talking about, LA? We're in Los Angeles, and had no idea what she was talking about. And that's how naive I was at that time. Not worldly wise, nothing, just swimming, school, study. That's all I ever did.
At some point along the way, in retrospect, it's clear that you would have been one of the swimmers that George Gibney was grooming.
Yeah, and that happened on that trip. On that trip, I got terribly homesick, as one would when you're out there for 5 weeks. And I remember breaking down and crying and just saying, I want to go home. And he comforted me as one would expect an adult person in that kind of a situation. And then I went to bed, and I felt fine. But later on that night, he snuck into my bedroom, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and he said, "Oh, are you feeling okay now?" And I said, "I'm feeling fine now. I brought you up this apple," and he put this apple on the sideboard, and then he said, "Do you want me to? Are you sure you're okay? Do you need any more comfort?" And I don't know what it was, but immediate alarm bells went off, and I said, "I'm fine. I think you should leave now." And he left, and that was the in for him. That was the opportunity. The vulnerability was there. He knew that I liked him praising me, and he went his way. And the next day I was fine. He started counting down to coming home, and I didn't think it was in any way odd that had gone on. And I didn't put two and two together until a long, long time later. I didn't realize that that's what was potentially that it could have resulted in a catastrophic personal outcome for me from that.
Maybe we'll spool forward to the bit where the penny does begin to drop, I guess, when you're actually told by a teammate that George Gibney had been abusing him. Obviously, he picks you because he thinks he's going to find someone who he trusts and who will give him a sympathetic ear. How quickly do you go, okay, yeah, like I fully understand exactly, I can see that?
When he sat down and he spoke to me, it was on a long haul flight, and he asked me whether I had ever, whether anything inappropriate had, this whole terminology that people use, anything inappropriate, whether I had, whether George Gibney had ever done anything to me that I felt uncomfortable with. And I just said, no, not at all. And then I said, why are you asking me these questions? Why did something happen to you? And then it just came out. It was like turning on a tap at full pace. And he he spoke for about 2 hours about what had gone on. And then he said to me, now, you got to keep that to yourself. I just wanted to tell you that. And I said, I can't keep this to myself. This is, I train with him. He's my coach. Our relationship, my relationship with George Gibney wasn't a particularly close one. Once that happened in California, when I came back, and I know he wanted me wind it forward, but my performance level dipped for a couple of years after that. I just wasn't physically as strong as other competitors, and I didn't start getting good again until I played a bit of rugby, toughened up a little bit, got a little bit stronger, then came back after a Junior Cup rugby campaign, and all of a sudden, bang, I was back in the skill again.
Around 15,
16. So I didn't represent Ireland at junior level at all. I just went straight onto the senior team.
Superstar 10-year-olds, and then just a pause in the development.
Absolutely appalling as a 13 to 16-year-old, and then from 16 on, much better. Never achieved, that kind of standout class that I would have been at 10, but nonetheless, very competitive on an international stage. So when he said this to me, just to fast forward again, I just didn't have that close relationship with Gibney through those early teen years. I had a lot of friends who were girls who were on the team at that time, and one by one they were just dropping off. They didn't want to have anything to do with me, or they were isolated from me, which is what I realized what was happening at the time. So I didn't realize why these girls no longer wanted to talk. So I sought solace elsewhere in terms of playing rugby. So I was doing loads of different sports at that time, and then eventually came back to swimming again. So it didn't have this particularly close relationship with them, but I kept training very hard throughout that period. So when he said it to me, I immediately believed him. And I think that once I said it to him, that I believe you, I think a weight lifted off his shoulders. I said, but I believe you, but you got to do something about this. He said, I don't want to do anything about it. And I said, well, I'm going to.
So at this stage, this is a long haul flight to World Championships in Australia.
Yeah, we were going to Perth. And
is George Gibney on the flight?
Yes. Yeah.
So he's on the same plane?
The same plane, yeah. So he's sitting, a couple of rows back, and then you land in Perth. You go for your first training session. George Gibney is standing over you saying, you've got to do X, Y, and Z, and you're looking at him going, whoa, how did you do that? And then you push off again and you just swim, you do a repetition, and he's down the other end saying, do this or do that. Sure, my head was fried, absolutely fried. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I couldn't sleep. There was the jet lag. I couldn't sleep because of all of that. So then my performance at that World Championships, I came 11th, which was appalling because I had come second in the European Championships, and that was the 4th fastest time in the world the year before. And no one was swimming much faster. It's just that I was going backwards at that stage. And I remember then I went from Perth and I went to see my cousin who lived in Sydney. And I remember explaining to him what he'd just been told. And he said, you got to do something about that. That can't go on, because if you don't do it, other people are going to get messed up.
So you're 21 at this stage?
Yeah, I'm 21. Then I come back and I left, came back in the middle of January, and I went back to college, and I was taking a little bit of a breather from the swimming, 2 weeks break, and I came back when I was due to be back after 2 weeks, and I turned up at a training session and in New Park School in Blackrock, where Trojans were based, where George was coaching, and went into the pool deck. And I just stood there, and he came over, and he ignored me for about 5 minutes. He wouldn't come over. He was very, very manipulative like that, and I was just standing there. And then he came over and he said, are you not getting in? I said, I'm not getting in. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week. I'm finished here. I'm leaving. I'm going to go and join another club. And he said, why? I said, I think you know exactly why I'm leaving, and it's nothing to do with my swimming. I just left. So that was in early 91. So then I had to try and get back on the scene and try and wonder what I was going to do about Gibney and how I was going to do it, because that was kind of like it was a big breakup in sporting relationships. It would be kind of like I suppose it was like Barry McGuigan leaving Barney Eastwood at some. It's kind of around that time, you know. We were synonymous with each other. So when the press broke, I couldn't tell anyone why I was really leaving. So I was making up excuses like, you know, the usual. I needed a fresh impetus. I was going a little bit stale in that environment, and I needed someone to bring me on to the next level. All the usual rubbish that you hear from professional sports people when they don't want to come out and say, I hate him, I can't stand his guts. But whilst I said that, he started to blame everything. He said, you know, he's only interested in enjoying himself. He's not committed to the sport. He doesn't have long left in the sport. He's near the end. He's got a girlfriend now. He's not completely devoted to his swimming. There are other things going on in his life, and I wish him the best. And it was just, in other words, any opportunity he could, he put the boot in, saying that he's terrible, he's bad, he's moving on, and it's not my fault that he's bad, and he won't get any better where he's going. So it took me a while to deal with that, and the outfall from that took about 4 months.
Did he know that you knew? Do you think he understood that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So straight away he was left in no doubt. You think?
No doubt about it. No doubt about it at all. That he knew, and so he tried to break me through the media, which was much more powerful in those days, Ger. There was very few media outlets, and if you get in with one media outlet, which he was very much so. His point of view was always put forward as being the one to believe, and there were a few media outlets. You'd be going to the renegade portion of the press. You would talk to people in the Sunday Tribune, perhaps, and they would believe you, because at that time that's where they sat, and they were the agitators, and they would say, "Is this right?" And you just
that's Vincent Brown, Sunday Tribune, and that legendary sports department.
Exactly. Yeah. So they would believe you, and you'd say, "Look, I can't tell you why I'm leaving him, but there are reasons," and they'd go, "Ooh," and then they would sit on it, and they'd come back again. So when I finished college that year, and I was in medical school, I decided I was taking the next year off, and I won the World Student Games that summer, which was a little bit of a return to form for me, much better than I had been swimming. And I was all the time devising this, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to, make sure that people are safe? And then what was best for me, I went away for a year. I went and lived in the States. And when I came back after the Barcelona Olympics, that's when we started on everything, because I had an absolute plan. Michael Kruth won his gold medal in the Olympic Games on the 10th of August 1992. We came back on the 12th of August 92. I started looking for people on the 13th, and I knew exactly where to go, what to do, and who to seek out.
His strategy was to try and break you through the media, as you say. That 92 Olympic Games, he's the lead analyst on the RTE television, analysing the swimming when you're swimming, and not swimming up to your own standards, because obviously there's some stuff going on in your head.
Well, I'd kind of sorted that the mental stuff out. I was okay with all of this stuff because I had a plan. I had it all set down, and I knew I was going to stick to that plan. I'm very methodical when it comes to that. I'm very well prepared. I say, this is what I'm going to do. In the first week I'll go here, then I'll do this, then I'll do that, then I'll do that. Had it all planned out. So that was compartmentalized for me. I was well able to do that. My problem was that in 92 we went to altitude for the first time. And when I went to altitude, I'm the kind of person that, if your coach says you got to do this, I will do it, and I will, make myself sick trying to do it. And of course, my body broke down at altitude. And when I came down from altitude, I would have needed about 6 to 8 weeks to recover. I had 2 weeks to recover prior to the Barcelona Olympic Games. So when I got to Barcelona, I was ragged. I just had no zip about me. And I knew I was about 4 weeks off being world class. And it's a world-class competition. I don't mean that, it's that I was going to win a medal or anything like that, but to leave with a personal best time, to be able to walk away from the sport saying, yeah, I did my best. But it was all to do with science and not nobody being able to control me and training too hard. But when I was performing badly then, he was stuck in the studio in RTE here in Donnybrook, saying, "Oh, he's absolutely awful. That's disgraceful. That's just a terrible swim for someone who would consider himself to be world class to be doing that kind of a time. There are better people left behind that should be there." That kind of stuff. Very upsetting. Not particularly for me, but for my parents. I really felt for my parents. And I felt for people that had invested in me, and I remember swimming my last event in the Olympics and touching the wall and just saying, thank God that's over. And that compared to my Olympic Games experience in 88, where if that could have kept going for the rest of my life, I would have been delighted. And that's sport, you got to take the good times with bad times. And my performance there had nothing to do with him. It was just to do with me. But yes, it didn't sit well with my family. And then when I came back, I hadn't told my family about what had gone on or the real reason why I had left in the first place. So when I came back and I told my parents that this is the type of man that he is and what is going on, and my parents kind of understood then, and I remember my mum, she turned to me and she said, you know what, what you're going to do is much, much better than what you could have done. So she said, forget about it.
Why didn't you tell them straight away? What stopped you from
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that any parents of any child that has been abused will always look to themselves and just say, how did I enable this? Not cause it, not encourage it, but did I do something or did I not do something that could have prevented all of this? And whilst I wasn't abused, I know the first thing that would have crossed their mind was,
were you? Yeah.
Oh my God, is he telling us the truth? Is he for real? He was 6 weeks in California with this man, and there was no one else there. Surely, and he's, and then they'd be drilling me all the time about this, and I know myself,
I know, like every conversation becomes loaded. You're like, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And then, they left it for a while. And I know my dad. My dad would have been looking for an excuse just to go in there and beat him up, And I didn't want that to happen. And when I told my parents and I told my brothers, what had gone on, that was their first reaction. That absolute first reaction, let me at him. Especially my younger brothers, they couldn't believe it. They were sitting at home as well, watching this on TV, and they were irate. And all they wanted then was just to light this tinder, and they would have, it would have got violent. So when I said to them, I said, look, that's not it. This is the way we're going to deal with it. This is what's going to happen, and we just go on from there. I really had to hold them back, and that wasn't. It wasn't that he had abused me, but I remember one night going to see this woman who I felt might have been one of his victims through the time. And the front door opened, and her husband was standing there, and he looked at me in the eyes, and he said, "Gary O'Toole, I've been expecting you for years. She's in the kitchen." So I went into the kitchen and spoke to her, and he came in then eventually, and he said, "You have no idea. I've been waiting for you because eventually I was going to go down there with a shotgun and just stick it in his mouth." And he said, I'm so happy to see you, as is she. And so when everything didn't go according to my plan later on with the judicial system, you can see how upset I was and how upsetting it was for the victims who had invested, and invested all their belief in what went on with the judicial system.
But the plan seems foolproof, that you will gather as much information as you possibly can, as many eyewitness accounts, make sure that everybody goes to the Gardaí together in a concerted effort to make sure that there's no doubt about this. It's not just one person coming forward. It's not somebody with an axe to grind. There's no one bearing grudges. Here is a bunch of people who have, at the same time, shared experiences over 2 decades, effectively. It seems like a foolproof plan.
Well, when one person confided in me, you'd have to believe that this wasn't, an isolated incident. They're serial abusers. So when I went to find other people, it wasn't that I wanted to build up a case. One person is one person too many, and so for that one person, I knew that one person that confided in me needed other people to have been abused too, so that this person wasn't on their own. Yeah. That was really important to them. And when I went to the other people then, and it started to gather and swell, and more people were coming forward, and then the case was being built up. I actually had very little to do with it after that. The police would only speak to them, not to me. And the one thing that I didn't want it to appear was that this was a personal vendetta, which it could easily be spun as.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, when he was saying those things about me at the Barcelona Olympic Games, it did upset me. It didn't make me angry or anything like that, and I felt for my family who were at home. But it wasn't the impetus to go and do this. I was going to do this anyway, and even if I had have done really well at those Barcelona Olympic Games, the same thing. I was going to do the same thing. I was going to dedicate myself over the following 4 months to making sure that this was done correctly. So we did it correctly. I called on a psychologist who had been closely involved with swimming at one stage, and I said, look, if they need someone from the medical profession, can I give them your name, and then you can direct them down to the police and the Garda station, who were very, very good at dealing with the victims. They take their statements, and then they kept them up to date all the way through, from the Dunleary Court all the way through to the Circuit Court, and then eventually the Supreme Court.
Before you got there, I think there had been some complaints made along the way about George Gibney. So it wasn't that this came as a massive surprise to the Irish Amateur Swimming Association as they were then, that there had been an exchange of letters, that your frustration built to the point where you asked swimming to deal with this, and you're like, okay, the law is the only recourse here.
I did nothing for the time that I lived in the United States. I didn't write to the Irish Swimming Association, but when I came back in August, I wrote to them straight away, and I said, look, this guy has abused children, and he has children in his a club that are vulnerable now, and there's no doubt that if you got an opportunity, you would abuse them. I think that you should stop your association with him and not run any courses. I remember we met with the swimming association, myself, the husband of a victim and another victim. We met with them in the Ashling Hotel in Dublin, and I said, in 2 weeks' time, you're holding a swimming course where George Gibney is the coach. And this swimming course is for children, swimmers aged 11 and under and 13 and under. I said, just cancel it. And they said no. And they said, look, I'm not asking you to cancel it just so that I can get one over on George Gibney. You need to take a stance here now, and you need to be believing these two people that I've brought along, who were members of your association, by the way, when they were abused. This was the Leinster branch of the Swimming Association. And they said, well, no reason to cancel this. And I said, what about the testimony of this victim? Or what about the testimony of this husband who's married to this woman who was abused while she was a member of your association? They said, no. And the course went ahead.
It's insane when you think about it.
Well, it's a terrible indictment of the association as it was, that they just didn't trust, and they were afraid that if they called it off, the power of George Gibney at that time, what he could potentially have done to them, could he have sued them for X, Y, and Z? That's all they were worried about. And they weren't worried about the victims, who had been abused, was swimmers.
I guess it paints a picture of Ireland in the 1990s, the early 90s in particular, that child protection wasn't something that people understood. It wasn't something that was part of their thinking, and it's not that they didn't care about it, but it feels that way from this distance.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems that we face today, is looking back with, the knowledge that we have now, the cases that have come to light since then, and looking back 26 years ago, the country was very, very different. We spoke about media and the difference with the media coverage of all different stories and the monopoly that certain media outlets had at that time. People didn't talk about this stuff. What really brought it to light, what exploded, was Father Brendan Smith. And then there was George Gibney, and George Gibney is synonymous with paedophilia in Ireland now. And then after George Gibney, Jerry O'Rourke, and after Jerry O'Rourke, Gerard Doyle, and all three of them were Irish Olympic swimming coaches. There was something fetid in the community of Irish swimming. It was rotten to the core. So you couldn't expect them to behave any way differently. After Gibney, they were hit with O'Rourke. After O'Rourke, they were hit. And I think that what happened with the Gibney case is that, yes, it's the work that was done by the Gardaí and everyone else, it made other victims stand up and say, hold on a second, there is an outlet here. This is how you do it. This is what we have to do. So if anything, that the Gibney and the plan that I'd laid out for Gibney, it seemed to prove people and enable people to come forward and give them the confidence that, the Swimming Association might not believe you, but there are people out there that will believe you.
And the plan worked to the point where victims came forward, the Gardaí investigated, the DPP brought a case, the High Court says, yes, you can proceed with this case, and then ultimately the Supreme Court decided that the statute of limitations should apply, or that too long had gone.
Yeah,
maybe not statute of limitations.
There's no statute of limitations, but that they felt that the duration of time between the last case that he had been accused of and the time at which he was being brought to court, which was 5 or 6 years, by the time he got to that point, was too long for him to mount a defence, that he didn't have diaries that he'd be able to say he was X, Y, and Z. And some of the victims, nowadays it's not unusual to see that victim X was abused over 90 times over a period of time between X and Y. Not that she or he was abused at 8:30 a.m. on the morning of the 17th of March 2000, whatever it was. So it was very different, and it was looked upon very differently now. And what wasn't appreciated was that no victim of child sexual abuse at the age of 10 or 11 is going to turn around at the age of 14 and say, I'm a victim of child sexual abuse. That's not how it happens. They come through their adolescence and often into their early 20s, into their 30s. For many people, their life has been a struggle. They've gone off the rails somewhat. And then they realize, they get their life together again. They say, that's the reason. That's why it happened. I was 10 years of age and that man did that to me. And if he hadn't have done that, I would have stood a better chance of making a success of life. So they look back at it and they go say, now I want something done about that man. And that's exactly what happened to all of these victims. And that's the shocking thing.
That's why there's a feeling with the Gibney case that it needs to be spoken about and that there is no justice for the people who he raped and abused over a period of time.
Yeah. And it's absolutely right. You know, they never got their day in court. They never got to stand up in front of him and to confront him in a fashion that a lot of the victims of Derry O'Rourke did and the victims of Gerard Doyle did. They didn't get to read out their victim impact statement. A lot of things that they are owed by the state, they never received, and that's one of the things. Unfortunately for them, such as the ruling now, that 3-2 ruling in the Supreme Court that too much had elapsed, that they will never get that. They'll never get that opportunity. The thing about the Gibney case, and although O'Rourke tried to use the same defence and that wasn't allowed, it does raise the possibility and the questioning of people, well, why was Gibney different to O'Rourke when they both used the same defence? Why did one get away with it and the other one had to stand trial on it? So that leaves the door open for innuendo, gossip, and, the conspiracy theorists out there to weave a web and say, well, is it because George Gibney was that powerful in Ireland at that time amongst a certain element of society that they felt this guy, we should just let him off?
That's why I think it's important for the Irish state to publish the documents, whatever documents are available around that period of time. We obviously are speaking with Irvin Muchnick about this, and he's taken a long-standing case to try and get the US documents released. But there are Irish documents that he has access to because they went through the Department of Homeland Security. And you feel like surely it's in the interest of the Irish state, whatever the privacy issues may be, to say, okay, well, these are the facts of the case as we know them. Mm-hmm. And this is why the DPP has decided to seek an extradition or not seek an extradition. And I think too much of this has actually been swept under the carpet for too long. As a society, we need to go, if there are issues for this man's privacy, let's hear that out in court. But first, these are the details of what we know.
And Irvin has done quite a remarkable job. He's come up against so many brick walls and blown them up and stepped across the rubble onto the next brick wall. He really needs to be praised. I cannot praise him enough for what he has managed to achieve. I've seen the redacted documents, and some of the redacted documents are a whole page of redacted statements with just one word that they felt could be allowed. And do I think that the Irish state owed to the victims of George Gibney to show us the state papers that were involved in that? Yes, I do, and I think that they deserve it, because I think that he was treated differently. I'd like to know why he was treated differently. And if it was just that the 5 justices of the Supreme Court thought at that time that this is how he should be treated and there's nothing to hide there, well then so be it. I think everyone is willing to accept the law of the land and just say, okay, let's move on. But there are some victims who have never moved on, unfortunately.
That's the real issue, I guess, as well with all of this, that the point you were making about those lives that have been ruined. And, we've heard from the powerful testimony of so many victims recently who've spoken about these issues, and anything that might bring closure to those people, I guess, is to be sought after as a society. And that's why I think it's probably important that we continue to talk about these things.
Sometimes, and we're in the, it's all over the papers now about the Kerry babies, and sometimes the hardest word to say is "I'm sorry," and I think that for the way that they've been treated and the way that George Gibney seems to have escaped any justice here in Ireland, I think they do deserve an apology. from people who were responsible at that time, many of whom are dead. Many of whom are not around to answer their own actions at that time. And you have to keep in mind that it would be all very well and good if everyone was still there, if we could wind back the clock, knowing what we know now, and everyone could be around, and we could have good investigative journalists around at that time to keep an eye on things. But it wasn't the case. And we spoke previously, although they didn't get their day in court, once it went and it was dismissed by the Supreme Court, the Sunday Tribune did go after him and got affidavits from all the victims, and Johnny Waterson rounded up all the victims and took statements, harrowing statements, and they published it front page 1, 2 and 3 about why this man was a paedophile, and published a big picture of him. And, you know, they're to be commended for having done that in that era where it was just not done.
It's Gary O'Toole speaking to us yesterday. We'll speak with Eoin Muchnick on the show tomorrow to bring you up to date on the ongoing case that Muchnick has taken against the US State Department and a freedom of information to find out exactly how it was that George Gibney has been allowed to continue living in the United States. If you want to get in touch with us about anything that's arisen on the show today, of course, you can always get us on Twitter, and that full video will be available for you on YouTube if you missed any of it, or if you want to look back at it as well, of course. Right. It's one of those shows where, like, really we decided to do that piece on the back of the Muchnick story breaking just before Christmas, but it was really a follow-up to the interview that Karen Leach did with Nathan on the Saturday panel in early December. She spoke about the impact, the devastating impact that the abuse that she suffered at the hands of Derry O'Rourke had on her life, on her family. Her mother ends up dying by suicide. Her father on his deathbed is apologising to her for what happened to her, and she talks about the treatment that she required for mental health issues over a long period of time. She says she was basically imprisoned for 37 years on the back of the abuse that she suffered at the hands of Derry O'Rourke. So when you see stuff like that, you realise that ultimately we should continue to air these stories and talk about them and give coverage to the fact that certain people have been so brave in coming forward in spite of the fact that the justice system ultimately lets them down, and that the country therefore lets them down again after they've been made victims in the first place. So if you missed that, you should dig it out. It's harrowing listening, and it's well worth your time. That's Karen Leach speaking with Nathan on the Saturday panel sometime just before Christmas, or early December it would have been. So if you just search Karen Leach off the ball, you'll get that there. So just to briefly tell you about what's coming up on the radio tonight. Keith Wood is on Wednesday Night Rugby. Paul Rouse is going to chat to Joe about the 6-time major winning tennis player that you've never heard of. And then tomorrow morning on Off the Ball AM, as I've said, we'll be talking with the American investigative journalist Eoin Muchnick, who's obviously been covering Gibney's movements in the States and has spent years working on sexual abuse in American swimming. We'll also talk about the start of the hurling league. Shane Stapleton is going to join us in studio to preview the return of the leagues, which hasn't really been getting that much coverage from most places. You are particularly excited about it?
Always excited about the start of the league. I think there's a very fair point to say that the Football League is lessened in significance this year as a result of the Super 8s, and I think that's fair from my perspective. David Clifford, James O'Donoghue, Paul Greaney, full forward line lining out for Kerry on Sunday. That's a very high potential of that happening, so I couldn't be more excited for the start of the leagues. But the hurling, of course, still matters, doesn't it? Well, maybe not, because of those round-robin situations as well. Basically, the championship tweaks have screwed over my beloved league.
Yeah, totally.
We'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow morning.
Yeah, for sure. Right, that's our lot tonight. That's our lot this morning. We will see you tomorrow. Good luck.